interest that deals with their hereditaments, corporal or incorporeal. That means inherited lands, inherited estates, inherited property, wealth, etc., etc., right to self-authority, governing structure, etc., control of resources, etc. So when you look at the Moorish Divine and National Movement, it deals with these matters of restoring those things to a people who have lost their grand estate. And logically, you don't take a people who don't know the principles of government and just give them an estate. They lose it. They give it back because they don't know the rules of the game. Therefore, they must learn certain fundamental truths in civilization that are key and necessary to make them better citizens, so that they, whatever they gain, that it can be their possession, that they need not be poor, that they need not be oppressed, and that if they have disorder in government, they need to have understanding on how to keep those things in order. Therefore, they must know fundamental principles of constitutions and the bylaws that go in constitutional order for both internal and external operations and interchanges with other peoples and nations, i.e., so that we can take our places in the affairs of men, logically. Now, as our people have been under forced servitude, the principles that involve these matters logically has not been part of our teaching affairs. So when you look at the Moorish Divine and National Movement, you recognize that it has two tiers. There's national and there's divine. Can I see that booklet for a minute, please? Misunderstanding the Moorish Divine National Movement, yes. And so as an example, you know, when you're talking about national and divine, to ignore the fact that that's said to you would create certain assumptions for people who don't know really what they mean. And they would usually assume connotative meanings to it if they're been generally educated within the systems under European controls as we know them. And so one of the things that I did, when I did a lecture in 1984, it was at Melandra Hall, as a matter of fact, in Melandra Hall in Camden, in South Camden. And what I did, I presented certain questions from the questionnaire, and I went from there into a political perspective in order to relate how it relates from a metaphysical perspective into the physical realm or into the civic realm. And so some of the questions I had presented was some excerpts from the questionnaire for Moorish children, and to use them for corrective concept references and analysis. And one of the questions I used was number 12, number 13, number 14, number 15, number 16, number 21, number 30, number 31, number 32, and number 33, just as examples. We could go further than that, but just as examples to express where they would lead you. You know, because the questionnaire, when studied, it leads you to other information if you're paying attention. Now, as an example, say question number 12. And question number 12 is, what is his nationality? And it says, Moorish American. Then question number 13 says, what is your nationality? And its answer is Moorish American. Then number 14, it says, why are we Moorish Americans? And the answer is, because we are descendants of Moroccans and born in America. And then 15 says, for what purpose was the Moorish Holy Temple of Science founded? And the answer is, for the uplifting of fallen humanity. Number 16 says, how did the Prophet begin to uplift the Moorish Americans? The answer is, by teaching them to be themselves. These are keys. So 21 says, how old is our flag? Answer, it is over 10,000 years old. Now, Number 30. What was the nationality of Ruth? Answer, Ruth was a Moabitess. Question 31. What is the modern name for Moabites, for the Moabites? Answer, Moroccans. 32. Where is the Moroccan Empire? Answer, northwest of Mexico. 33. What is the modern name for Amexem? Africa. So now a child now has correlative cognizance that Africa, Morocco, Moroccan, Amexem are both geographical and pedigree references because it's put in perspective. Now, so what do you do with that? What is it that you recognize in that when you begin to study anthropologically, etymologically, sociologically, geographically, geologically, etc.? It becomes apparent that you're dealing with geographical jurisdictional issue, which means it's naming or giving you a generalized direction of territory. And territory, terror comes from earth, which means earth. So now you're being directed to pay attention to a geographical territory that relates to you that before you may not have thought related to you, as you may have assumed it related to someone else. So now you discover you thought you left Africa because the colonists told you that they brought you from Africa. Now you discover that you're at and in Africa. Then you begin to recognize that, well, if Africa is a modern name and Amexem is an ancient name, then that means there's more history that you haven't been told about because you've been told about the oldest history is African history. So now that begins to change concepts on how you to look at the world and yourself, isn't it? Now, when we look at African history in general as it's presented under colonial powers, it always emanates almost immediately from a slave connotative venue. Almost immediate how they address it. Now, what about this Moabite history? And why are they mentioning Ruth the Moabitess? Then when you start doing research on Ruth the Moabitess, you discover that Ruth was the one who they called Jesus. It's his great-great-great-grandmother. Now, she's Moabite. What's it telling you about him? He's Moabite. That's the signification. Then when you start discovering the Moabites, then you begin to recognize that in linguistics, that the ancient Moabites spoke languages belong to what you would call early forms of high